Today, we're welcoming Alex Mathew to the Merge Club podcast. I'm really excited for this conversation. Alex is a 16-year-old based out of Texas. He's building a startup called Berry, which is essentially an AI mental health plushie product. And I mean, he's been making some really, really wicked fast progress over the past couple months or so. He got a grant from 1517, Cactus Capital. He's just been crushing it. So I'm really excited to speak with him, about everything he's working on with his first company, but also just how he thinks about mental health, how kids are educated and raised in the States, what he's seen from all the people that he's spoken with along the way to building what he's building now. Without further ado, enjoy the conversation. With these episodes in general, I think it's just super cool to sort of like turn back the clock and like start from day zero and hear, you're 15 now. Like, how did you, stumble across everything that you're working on now? What was sort of the moment, like the catalyst?
Yeah, it's a great question. And it's hard to think about, honestly. As a kid, I'd say I was always very, very curious. A classic like Lego builder, always asking dumb questions. But I think the lead up has honestly, like I said before, just been like the privilege I've had, like the access to technology. I'd call myself a master Google searcher, master Googler, because I would just look things up if I was curious about something. And that's how I stumbled across, TKS, all the grants I've applied to, how I came across Merge or you guys. And I've just explored my curiosity. And I think that's what's been most valuable. And yeah, that's pretty much it.
What were some of these dumb questions that you asked, or these like crazy questions that you asked, like when you were a kid, like you're 15 now. So like when you were even younger, like what were some of these questions that you were asking, maybe of adults or of Google?
Yeah, it's a good question. Actually, just turned 16, by the way, guys. But thank you. But honestly, just like why anything? Like I'd always question everything. Like, why is the sky blue? Like if I was forced to do something, why do I have to learn how to swim or something like that? Like I'm always questioning everything and why I have to do it, because I want to like make sure I'm doing the things that are actually going to make my life good or make me have a good life. Like I want to make sure that I'm actually having good intention coming into something. And so I think my parents would get tired of me asking questions for sure, because I would always be like, why am I doing this? Like, what is the point of this? That's kind of why.
What yeah, that's fascinating. Why do you think people or maybe they ask why and then they don't actually act on it? What do you think might cause that transition? Because you haven't gotten there, hopefully you'll never get there. But a lot of people do. A lot of people do sort of say, oh, why is that the way it is? And then they just go about their lives without sort of answering that question.
I actually think I have hit that block before, and it's because of like my schooling, like the education system, to be honest, because we're like told to do things and to like from people we look up to, teachers, adults in general. And so I feel like there's this notion that's like you have to do it, right? Like it's not a choice. And it's for your own good. Like the kid isn't usually right. Like the younger person doesn't know as much as the older person. We all have something to learn from each other. That's like something I live by. I think it's just because of the fact I've been like in my old school, I was forced to like just do random assignments that I didn't really care for, like learn the subjects that don't really matter to me in the future. Like I feel like every student has asked this question, like, why do I have to know this in 20 years, like in 30 years or something like that? And it's just, usually there's no explanation as to why you have to do something. And I genuinely think it's just because of the rigid education system we have now.
And so, I mean, I know that now you're in a different school than the one that you were in when you maybe started asking all these questions. I'd love to hear more about like what that transition looked like and why you made that decision in the end to make that switch. Because I'm not from Texas. I imagine that the school system in Texas is quite similar to the school systems in a lot of the United States and the world, where they maybe are more rigid, more traditional. How did you even come across the school you're in now, and walk us through more of what that process looked like?
Yeah, great question. Again, I'm a master Googler, so I just found it on the web. But a lot of people have been telling me about the school called Alpha High School, where I go now. and I can finish all my academics in 3 hours, and then you get to work on a project of your choice for all 4 years of high school. So I'm currently an 11th grader, and at my old school, it was a very high standard school. Like, you were required to do a lot of work. It was very rigorous, very intensive, and the people were amazing. But the lifestyle you're living is awful. Like, I was genuinely working, like, 8 hours of school, then 3 to 4, even more hours of homework and studying for the next test. And it's a constant like cortisol release, right? Like, you don't think about how it hurts your like physical health too. Like, you're constantly stressing about the next thing. You're getting no sleep. You're not eating the right thing. You don't even think of that because you're just so worried about like schoolwork. So I now spend a fourth of the time I used to on school, which is literally 3 hours, from 12 to 3 hours. And now I have the time to like, hang out with my friends or go to sleep for a full 8 hours or do the things that actually matter to me and I actually care about. And the really cool thing about Alpha is that I can question things without being like ridiculed. The first quarter of school this year was a lot different than the quarter I'm in now because we gave feedback on how things went and they implemented it. Like, the school system is like now different than it was just a month or two ago, which is insane to me. And they're receptive to it because it makes sense. Like, one change we made was, like, for example, we were working on our projects and a lot of the problems we were having was because we didn't have enough base knowledge about, the project I was working on. So for me, that was like the neuroscience behind mental health. So I said, why don't we just spend, 3 weeks doing like a little research sprint, and then we can like have a base level of knowledge so we can start working on how to make products better, or we have a big focus on audience building so we can teach things to people and we actually know what we're talking about. And then they implemented the research sprint, and now we did it, and now we are all better at knowing things about our projects, and it's a lot more fun because we know things about it. So it's just the small things like that, and it's built up to something really cool. So I love how receptive they are to our input. They don't underestimate us. They treat us like an equal.
Super interesting. I mean, I imagine for people who are listening to this who maybe are not super familiar with these new ideas and these new kinds of schools, I mean, if you had to sort of like sum up the difference between what the work actually looked like, spending 8 hours or 6 hours a day, in a school building compared to just them doing like 3 or 4 hours of schoolwork, and then the rest is unstructured and you can sort of focus on your project, like that just seems like such a large difference. How are you getting, like a similar level of education or maybe more with this completely different model? Like, how does that actually add up?
Yeah, it's a good question. So yeah, we learn in 3 hours and we learn twice as fast. So we can like get a 5 on our APs much earlier than anyone at my old school could. And I think what it comes down to is like the actual work we're doing. Like, at my old school, I would get handed literally pieces of paper that were not relevant to, the test I was taking the next day. Or it was just so convoluted that we wouldn't learn anything. It's so surprising to me how much more capable we are when we're given the right resources. And you can learn a lot of things on your own a lot faster than you think you could. So I think there's, the two parts is like people underestimating you. And then because they're underestimating you, they give you just like things that aren't applicable to you. So instead of, doing worksheets that don't really matter or having long lectures, we can watch a video on like 2 times speed and learn at the pace we need. Like, for example, I'm in like 8th grade reading, but I'm an 11th grader, but I'm in like, college level math or beyond. So I can learn the math as fast as I want to, but I can go as slow as I need to with the reading part because I'm not as good at it. So they're just making sure to cater to you because we need that personalization. Like, without it, you're learning like at one level when you might be here or you might be up here. So I think it's just the personalization aspect that is much different for sure.
Do you think about role models, not necessarily role models, people who are, decades ahead of you or years ahead of you, people who are kind of maybe a few steps ahead of you? How have they influenced you?
I think people who are just a couple steps ahead of you know the place you're in now very well because it was just a little bit of time ago they were in that place. I think what you have to be careful of though is like idolization. What I used to do is always think about what other people would think of me. Like, I look up to this person, what would they think if I was like taking 30 minutes to relax? And I'd be like, I can't relax anymore. But obviously those peoples are like those people are mentors to you. Like they have so much valuable advice because they understand what the context of your situation is, and it's much closer, you're much closer in age range, or you know, geographically, like they understand you and they can give advice that's relevant to you. I've also fallen into the trap of taking advice from literally everyone at any point, but you have to understand what perspective resonates with you most, and usually that is people who are just a couple steps ahead of you because again they understand your situation fully.
We've seen this a lot with ODF too, where, we sometimes bring in people who are guests, who are founders, who have billion-dollar companies or multi-billion-dollar companies. And then we bring in people who are founders that are maybe a year ahead of the people who are exploring starting companies. Almost unanimously, there's this level of inspiration that comes from the people who are much further along, and their advice is much more philosophical, which is useful in its own ways. But the people who are just a year ahead, it seems much more relatable and much more actionable in terms of the way to think about what your next few months look like. So it sounds like that's kind of similar to what you're describing as well.
Exactly. Like if you're getting advice on how to scale, but you're not even finished with your first MVP or something, then that has no that's not applicable to you. It might make sense to the person who has $1 billion company, but it doesn't make sense in your case. But yeah, completely agree.
And so, I mean, I'm very curious to hear like what your perspective is on sort of like the student body and like the first school and the school you're in now. I know, since joining Alpha, you're experiencing sort of just like the broader startup ecosystem. You went into TKS, and I want to ask you about that in a moment. But what is the difference that you're seeing between people who are still sort of going through this more traditional education system and the people who are maybe spending more time on their projects? Do you feel like across the board they're maybe doing more exciting things, or maybe finding what they're passionate about a lot faster than the other group? Do you feel like maybe people in the traditional school are sort of like more well-rounded, sort of across topics? I'm curious to hear what differences you see, if any. I assume you would, but I'm curious to hear.
To me, it comes down to just like limiting beliefs. That was a big problem that I struggled with early on. It's like, okay, I ask all these questions, but how capable am I of answering them? Or like, to what level can I actually do this? And to me, it's like the people here believe they can literally do anything and they know it will happen because they've set their mind to it. Everyone, in my opinion, everyone has potential. Everyone is ambitious, and that just needs to be like you have to like let that happen. And obviously, like you're always fighting against people who don't want to let it happen because of what we think needs to happen. For example, like get a normal job and then, or like go to college, then get a normal job, and just live 9 to 5 life. But I think the people here know that they're capable of more. Like they can have big impact. They can help people no matter what and still live, a happy life. So to me, it's like, I mean, I also know people who've worked around the old education system to do what they really want to. I was trying to do that, but it's really hard, guys. Like it's really hard to fight that system. And so when you're given, to me, like the gift that I got when I came to Alpha was time. Like time is the greatest resource, especially when you're younger. To like with this neuroplastic brain, you can just explore anything you want, and learn anything you want. And when you're given the gift of time, you learn so much more about yourself, so much more about the world, as long as you have that like guiding light. And obviously you need like people who are facilitating that. We have amazing adults here who are helping that. But it's funny that you say like well-rounded, because I actually think the people here are more well-rounded because they know how to manage their physical health and mental health with like schoolwork, with what they're super passionate about. And there's so many more aspects to life than just school and learning. And I think that's like more skills that you have to develop even when you're younger. Like you have to build these good habits. And that's something that I lost when I was at my old school. So that's like some of the stark differences that I see between people here and people back there.
I'd love to, learn a little bit more about what you're working on and have you share it, with everybody who's listening here. But maybe as a way to sort of transition into that, how do you think about stress? Good types of stress, bad types of stress, and how have you sort of taught yourself to think about stress in your life?
Yeah, it's super subjective. I think I have I have a tendency to be a workaholic. I have like a workaholic personality, and I like building all the time. I like being stressed in general. But yeah, it comes down to a couple things. The first is what you're actually working on. So when I was at my old school, I was always stressed because I didn't really like the stuff that I was doing. I am a nerd, so I did find some joy in like some of the classes I was doing, but not to the level of like you're tested on your ability, and if you fail, you're like that's a bad thing. So I think it comes down to first what you're doing, and then the second thing is like the systems you have in place to manage what you're doing. For me, like something that I need is like walks or conversations with my friends. And you have to find what works for you that will help you relax and help you stop thinking about the thing that, you're stressed about or that you love doing sometimes because you need that break. But yeah, I agree. The good type of stress is when it's hard to explain because I've found something that I'm really obsessed with. So the thing I'm stressed about is like the thing I love doing. It's like the you know, next call I have. I'm a little bit stressed about it, but I'm excited for it too. So I think if you have that mix of like stress and excitement, that's a good thing. Where it gets really bad is like when I was talking about earlier, that cortisol release when you're just like, it's fully negative. Like you're just so overwhelmed that you can't even focus on one thing. So what it comes down to is what you're working on and the systems you have in place and what you do to take care of that.
Well, say more about what you're working on right now.
Yeah, sure. So I'm currently building AI powered plushies for teens' mental health. My goal is to bridge the gap between people who have no support system in place and for those who have therapy, which is, $150 to $250 an hour. So there's a lot of financial barriers, there's a lot of stigma barriers, and my goal is to help teens build good habits. Like my goal is to help them live a good life, and I think that can be done through a comfortable interface, comfortable UI like a plushie who's there as support. It's supposed to be super easy to just talk about your feelings. So it's just like a plushie on your bed you can talk to at any moment. The heaviest focus I have is on accountability. Something I noticed with a lot of teens, I did like 50 user interviews in like a week or two because I wanted to understand this problem and what people are struggling with. And it's staying accountable and making sure they're on track and they're making progress. And building that system is really, really hard. Like I'm still in the process of building that system for like working out or like eating healthily. And it's not easy, especially when you go to school for 8 hours a day and you're worried about homework and you're stressed about all these things. So I want to make something that's easy to make that happen and fun to make it happen. So you can actually create these systems and you like doing, going for walks or working out or journaling or working on your mental health. So that's my goal.
Super cool. And I mean, I'm curious to hear like how you're actually beginning to go about this. I mean, it seems like you have high conviction on the idea. I know you've been working on this for a relatively short period of time, but enough time to make progress and begin building out prototypes. How has that process looked like? Is this something that you're sort of bootstrapping? Is this something you're building out in your basement? Are you working at some sort of hardware lab? What does this actually look like as a 15-year-old trying to build a hardware company?
16.
Yeah.
16-year-old.
16. Yes. Good question. So my MVP right now is like a phone number that you can call up and talk to my AI model with. So super easy, but it's great in terms of getting feedback and making the model as great as possible. The hardware part is not as easy as just whipping something up really quickly. But it's super simple. The way I'm approaching it is just by literally connecting ChatGPT, my fine-tuned model, to a Raspberry Pi and sewing that in a stuffed animal. And that's how I'm going to do it. And I've been working on it actually this week. My goal is to have it done by the end of next week. Yeah, it's just me in my room or me at school, just working, grinding, finishing it up. What doesn't matter to me is like, usually my physical space doesn't matter, but it's about the people who I'm around. So I'm always talking to people who's like, oh yeah, you can totally do this, encouraging people, always on my side. That's been really empowering for me. In terms of bootstrapping, I've gotten a couple grants, one from 1517 Fund, a couple others. So they're helping out in terms of paying for the like Raspberry Pi or the physical components or the API credits or whatever. So that's helped out a lot. And Merge Club has been pretty awesome there too.
Could you say a little bit more about why you wanted to spend time on this specifically?
Yeah. So my long-term goal, 10, 20 years, is basically to redefine the way we raise kids.
Hmm.
Because what I've noticed is that, like we were talking about, my curiosity has been explored because of the privilege I've had, and I want to make sure everyone can do that and make sure everyone's doing that in a way that is fulfilling and in a way that they love doing. And I think a big blocker right now is mental health. And I've seen that in my old school, in myself, in my family. And it's honestly like a problem that's deeply rooted in emotion. So it's like something that I really just really want to solve because I've seen it again, like in everywhere around me, especially in my old school where we're constantly stressed. It's like, I want to help you guys because you guys are going to be building the future. Like if our future generation, I don't know if you've heard the book, like the anxious generation, like if the people of the future are going to always be anxious or stressed or worried about the next thing, then think about how much potential is being crushed there. That is insane to me. So yeah, the long term goal is to redefine the way we raise kids in terms of education. But right now, I think what's really pressing is mental health, and we're talking about it a lot, but no one's really. There's a couple of people doing stuff, but we're not all honestly all in on it, and we're talking about it, but we're not doing. So my goal is to be the one who's doing it and catering to the people that I see it in, which are my friends and myself. So I'm trying to build it for those people.
Why is this generation anxious?
It's a great question. And it literally comes down to, I had the privilege of having tech, but it's obviously has a lot of downsides too. Like social media is insane. Like I know we keep talking about it, but if you just understand how interconnected we are and how easy it is to idolize people and compare yourself to them or worry about your body image. I also think like education in general has ramped up. Like if you think about like how hard it is to get into college now, like so many people are stressed about that. So I think our standards of education in the normal education system have been risen by a lot. So that's another big key point. But it's mainly because we're so interconnected. It's easy for like rumors to spread, or it's easy to get into fights with people over the smallest things. Like it's insane how easy it is to fall into a dopamine rabbit hole scrolling on Instagram or TikTok or something like that. And we're literally like rewiring our brains by doing this. Like it's changing our reward system in our brain so that it's just kind of like a spiral. Like once you start scrolling, then other things become easier to do. So it's just a bad like spiral effect to the next thing. And it's just the fact that it's become more accessible more than anything. It's now easy to have bad mental health, which is an awful thing to say, but it's true.
What do you think this feeds into ambition and sort of goals for achievement? Do you think this sort of makes people want to be more ambitious? Do you think it sort of drives people in a certain direction? How do you think about that?
The word I want to use is like debilitating because once you're at like a low point, it's hard to even think about, your ambitious goals. You're just, when you're sick, you're just trying to get better, right? And so when you're working on, being less stressed or less anxious or less depressed or less sad all the time, the only thing you're worried about is getting better. I'd say it's hard to even think about those goals when you're struggling. As a result, people are less ambitious. My hypothesis is that we've become actually there's two sides to this. Because of technology, I think we also see how easy it is to do a big thing. Like we're exposed to people who have done these things at young ages, like the people from Merge, like they're doing amazing things. And I think that also inspires me to go do that thing. But on the other hand, it's also a case of imposter syndrome where it's like, oh my gosh, maybe I should be doing that. But I think, again, going back to the education system, there's nothing that's catering to you. Like, not everyone wants to work on a tech project or, build a business, which is okay. Ambitious goals can also be like, creating a song for the first time or producing music or something like that. And I feel like that's just much more stigmatized now. Like, you can't do anything like that. Like, you have to do something that, you're going to actually make money with or make a living out of. And so I think it's harder to cater to different kinds of people, especially in the rigid way we have, education now.
Do you think that there's some sort of maybe status or glorification is probably too strong of a word, but some sort of status around being sick. It feels like in some ways, sickness isn't always necessarily something that people want to solve or think is like something that's worth solving. I don't know. Have you experienced anything around that, or do you have any comments around that as somebody who's building in, a space to help people be healthier?
Yeah, there's a couple points there. The first is some people don't think they deserve to be helped. That's a big one that I've seen. Yeah, some people don't want to be helped because they don't think they need it, because they think they have to be strong for everyone else. I also know what you're saying. Like, there is some glorification of, having it's actually very interesting. There is some glorification of like being stressed, because then it's like you're tied to something where you're actually doing something, or like you're stressed for a reason. Those are like the three main things, the three main points that I've seen. But that's a great question. Yeah.
I feel like a lot of people would be interested to hear more about the interviews that you did, that sort of better informed how you went about building this product. It's like to help young people process their emotions. I imagine you probably learned a ton about how people think about mental health in general in these younger generations. And I know that you had some personal sort of experiences looking around, trying to come to conclusions on your own, but I'd love to hear first sort of maybe what some of those takeaways were from those interviews, that maybe they changed your mind on certain things, maybe they were just new learnings. And then after, I'd love to just learn more about maybe what you learned about user interviews and how to conduct those in a good way.
Yeah, for the first part, I think there was one big takeaway slash insight for me, and that came down to what people were scared of. I think like fear is the driving force for bad mental health, or bad action in general. And the two fears, I would always ask, like, what are you scared of? Like, when we got to that point, like, what are you actually scared of? And it would always boil down to two things, and everyone said two things, the same two things. The first was the fear of being alone, and the second was the fear of failure. And I think this is also a result of like our interconnectedness and social media, but everyone has those two fears. And specifically for teens, I'm not sure what it's like for adults, but everyone is scared of, their friends abandoning them, or them not getting the right grades, or them not achieving what the standard is for them. And I honestly, I think again, it comes down to the way you're being raised. Like, why are those fears there in the first place? You know, they've been put onto you by the way you've been raised, and that's okay. That's normal. But once you realize those are the two core things that are driving, these actions, this anxiety, that stress, and it's much easier to approach the way you want to treat it, or the way you want to go about building good habits in order to cancel that out. So I thought that was so interesting, because every single person I talked to, and that's not a joke, they all said the same thing. It was insane.
And I mean, I guess, but before we jump into maybe how you think about conducting user interviews, I'm curious. I feel like the system now, whether it's the education system or how people are raised today, maybe started at some point because, given sort of the period in time when this was implemented, it was the best way of going about it. Maybe it was what made sense. I wonder if you maybe have any thoughts on like why that may be, if there was a time where the sort of traditional education system and how kids are raised made sense, and maybe why it doesn't anymore.
I actually haven't thought about it too much. It's a great question. And I think you're right. I think it was, I mean, obviously the education system was defined way before we had, laptops or phones or generative AI or anything like that. Yeah, I think that it was a very good system when it was implemented. But the problem isn't like the system itself. Obviously, yes, it's a problem now. But the problem is that we've been so reluctant to change. Like, we don't want to change. We're scared of change. So when something new, like when computers first came out, I don't think they were not implemented in schools like very quickly. There was a reluctance to do so. And now every school you go to, in the US at least, we all have computers, and we're all like, on our laptops learning something there. And it's so funny to see the same thing happen with LLMs or chatbots or whatever you want to call them, because we're just hindering ourselves from like making potential being unlocked potential being unlocked in general. So I don't think it's the fact that like the system is bad. It's just that we don't want to change it. But that's a great question. I think it was good for its time, but we just need to be more, affectionate of change. We have to accept change because it's inevitable. We're just delaying the inevitable. It's going to happen at some point.
Seems like systems are almost in place to resist shock. You want to have resilient systems, and therefore you want to have systems that do change over time, but maybe don't change as rapidly and as fluidly as technology changes. And that's kind of why you see this lag in adoption. What do you think are like the most positive changes that you're seeing now with regard to education and sort of childhood development as it relates to technology?
I think I have like a biased perspective because I'm in a place where we are receptive to change. I think it's like the idea of giving kids like freedom to let loose or to do what they want, because like something that I'm super grateful for that I had was like when I was a kid I had an iPod Touch. Like it was the first like device I ever had, but I had it when I was super young. I think it was around 6 or 7. So I'm super grateful for that because that was the way I entered into the internet. And thank God it led to good things because I would only search up nerdy things. But I think it's parents giving their kids like freedom to explore their curiosity, and I think that comes in the form of technology or like a phone or something like that. Obviously that can lead to something bad like iPad kids or something like that, but I think it's the idea of letting the reins loose and letting them go free. Like one of my favorite like values of mine is like irrational curiosity, just letting anything happen because I'm just so curious about it. It's you're always hungry, I guess, feeding people in terms of their curiosity.
It feels like kids don't have much permission to roam in the real world compared to the amount of permission that they now have to roam on the internet. There was just some story recently about how some mom got arrested because her 16-year-old walked a mile into town, and they thought this was just this incredibly dangerous thing. It's a small town, I think, of like 400 people. Even when I was growing up, in 34, when I was growing up, that wouldn't have been considered a dangerous or irrational thing. But the internet was considered way more scary than it is today, even though arguably you could probably say that the internet is more dangerous now than it was when I was growing up. How do you think about that, sort of the permission to roam in real life versus the permission to roam on the internet?
That's so interesting. I didn't know that happened. I'm saying this as someone who's had super overprotective parents when I was a kid, but I kind of like broke them down. Like slideshows were the main way I did that. So I would show them why I deserve to, have the internet or have access to these things. But that's a good question. I obviously think there should be some limits or restrictions of like online behavior because it can lead to something really bad. I recently saw a story where a 14-year-old was using character AI and he got so attached to it that he ended up committing suicide, which is awful. So there do need to be, guidelines, restrictions in terms of how we're using the internet, which I don't think are in place. What's really holding us back again is fear, which is valid because there are these like horror stories of things that happen. But at some point you have to, I think it also just comes down to like believing in people. Like, yes, kids are more naive and they don't have as much life experience, but you have to be, again, receptive to growth, receptive to change, and foster that. I'm not exactly sure what it would look like in terms of restrictions for, technology or AI or even going outside in general, but I do know that we need we need a place to explore our curiosity.
Interesting. And I mean, I'd be very curious to hear, in the sort of like 50 or so interviews that you did for what you're building now, like, do you think the first 5 interviews looked any different compared to the last 5?
Yeah, it was a constant iteration. I'm actually quite disappointed in the first 5 interviews I had because I didn't even realize how bad they were. I thought I had it down. I was like, oh, I'm just talking to people. I shouldn't have to think about this too hard. But I'm sure the people watching this, I hope, have read the mom test, or you guys have read the mom test. You have to make sure you're being very open ended, because you don't know what can lead to insight. So the way I was approaching it was just having a set of questions that I thought had value to what I was building, but it was just super rigid. I felt people felt like pressured to say certain things, or they just wanted the easy way out, so they'd say something simple. But yeah, the key thing is just treating it like a normal conversation. Like, obviously you should have an objective in terms of like, what do I want to learn about this person? What do I want to learn about my product and how I can add value to this person's life? And for me, it was like, what is the root cause of some of the mental health problems you have? But you can't just ask that straight up like that. I don't think many people have thought about this. Like, you have to explore with them. It's like you're exploring something together, and it's a lot of fun. You just have to approach it in a way that's not going to overwhelm them super quickly, or that's not just super rigid. It's an exploration of the mind, to like what's going on inside of your head and why we do things. So treating it just like, yeah, again, a normal conversation, going off what they said before, have like one intention, one goal in mind, and just follow that and just see what your curiosity leads to. Because that eventually is what's important, like trusting your instinct and your curiosity. So I thought that was super interesting.
You said your long-term goal is ultimately to help, essentially raise better kids or help kids thrive. Maybe you can share a little bit more about, if you weren't starting with mental health and starting with what you're doing today with these plushies that, you can talk to and you can get sort of guidance from, what would you be doing outside of mental health to sort of work towards that overarching goal?
It's a great question. And we talked about it a lot this podcast, but it would be education. Another big pillar of what I'm doing with these plushies is personalization. And I talked about it a little bit earlier. What I'm very grateful for to have here at Alpha is people I can sit down with that know me as a person. They know my values. They know my goal in life. They know what I enjoy doing, or what the problems I have, like my situation in terms of how I'm living. And they can give me advice that's actually applicable to me. So I think the same thing goes with learning and the way you're educating people. And I talked about this earlier, but if you don't know how fast someone is innately at learning a certain subject, or the way they learn, like the learning style, like I hate reading articles and learning from them, but I love watching videos at 2 times speed because I can learn so much faster. If you don't understand enough about a person holistically, then you can't actually provide value to them, right? So if we could change the way we're teaching people in terms of what works best for them, that would like open up so much more, because we would just be so much more efficient, and we could learn so much more. We could explore our curiosity more. So my side passion, or I guess my really biggest passion, is education. It would be, maybe creating an AI tutor, or maybe going into school systems and try to restructure classes, or adding classes that are teaching people life skills, like how to be emotionally intelligent, or how to do your taxes, or something like that. That's actually going to add value to them later on in life.
Well, let's hope that none of us actually need to do our own taxes in the future. That would be quite nice.
That would be.
That's so funny. Boy, I wish that that my school taught me how to do taxes. Going forward, I know that you're based in Texas right now. You're going to the school, which it seems like you really love, and you're building this like startup, which is super exciting. I'm curious to hear like how community sort of plays a role in this, because I think a lot of people who might be getting to tech, who are not based in San Francisco or maybe New York, they really like the idea of that, one day, like they're gonna fly the coop, move to the Bay Area and live there and reap all the benefits of being in this concentrated, pool of talent. But it also seems like where you are now has a lot of benefits. You have this great school, you are building this project successfully. Like how have you interacted with communities, maybe in person, but also online? Because, as you mentioned before, you went to, the 1517 camp, I think you did a fellowship program in San Francisco. I'd be super curious to hear how community has played a role in sort of the growth curve that you've experienced over the past year or so.
I mean, community is honestly everything. Like people are everything. I'm definitely a people person, and finding the right people has been such an unlocker for me. And the first like scenario of that was for me was TKS, the Knowledge Society. And once you have people who are like you, and it doesn't have to be in person because I didn't do TKS in person, but once you have people who are there that support you and believe in you and share the same interests as you and are just as nerdy as you or like vibe with you in general, it's insane. Like I definitely struggled with so many limiting beliefs like, oh, I can't do this, or I don't know how to do this, or I'll never be able to do this. You know, the normal things that I think kids go through, or even humans in general go through. But once you find the people that you really care for and you just enjoy being around, it's insane what you can do and how much like living is just so much more enjoyable. It's just so much more enjoyable to live life because people are such a huge pillar of the way you live and your lifestyle. So yeah, TKS was a big part for me. I think I like vibe with a lot of different people. So I have people here in person too, my family, the school, my old school, even I still talk to people there. And once you like, I think a lot of people crave like relatability too. When you find people who could relate to you, that's like such a huge thing because you're not alone. Like again, one of the biggest fears that people have is being alone. And when you have that like self security, that self fullness of like, oh, I'm in a great place. It's hard to find that place, obviously, but once you're there, it's much more comforting. So you can worry about the next thing. A big like this is like going back to kind of something philosophical, but a big thing that we're doing in society right now is transitioning from like survival mode to thrive mode, from like being worried about what we're going to eat or our safety to caring about how we're going to make a big impact in the world. And I think part of that survival mode is also the people you're surrounded by, because if you're surrounded by people who are constantly negative or who are unsafe or different things like that, you're constantly worried. That's just another stress point. So I think, yeah, I can't even stress how important it is to find the people you vibe with and that you connect with well. And I think that's something that social media has brought to humans. Like you can now, because we're so interconnected, you can find someone you vibe with just by shooting a cold email. That's how I like got intro to 1517 and went to their camp this year. I just sent a cold email to Danielle, one of the founders, and she was like, "Oh, you're super cool. Like, let's chat more." And it's just so insane to me how how receptive people are to helping people or connecting with people, especially when you're young. Like people will be willing to almost overinvest in you and be care for you. Like that is just such a wonderful and beautiful thing to me.
That's so great to hear. I definitely, we're going to give you your chance to sort of give your parting words, give your speech to whoever might be listening. But before we get into that, I think it would be really cool just to like get your review from 1517. Maybe for people coming into this thinking like, maybe I'm building this cool thing. I'm completely broke. Maybe I'm a 16-year-old, or maybe I'm a university student, and I'm curious about grants. 1517 seems like a great sort of starting point. What was that process like? What are your tips, and what do you think are sort of like the core things that are really maybe great about the grant itself and sort of the other things that Danielle and the 1517 team can offer?
Yeah, that's such a great question. I first caveat I want to make is you already mentioned this, but only apply to grants if you like actually need the money or need the help. I think like people are more valuable than money, like when you're building something, because they can provide a lot of value to you. So even if you don't want a grant, please reach out to like 1517 because they are amazing. But in terms of like what you should show to them, I think honestly like that when I was talking about irrational curiosity, it's mainly that like show like your passion, show your excitement. The way you apply to 1517's Medici project is through a Loom video. So if you can like you can tell when someone is excited about something just by the look on their face. Like I'm sure you guys know this for sure. And so when you see that energy and you see like this thing, I'm just obsessed with this thing, I can't stop thinking about it, that's like a key indicator to like give someone a grant, because they're going to use it to the best of their ability because they're just so passionate and curious about this thing. So I think you have to show that passion. I think that's what it comes down to. But you also have to show like you know what you're talking about. Like I actually applied to it one time and I got rejected, and I applied to it again and I got it. And I was like, oh, I just got rejected from this grant. Oh, what am I doing? No, it's totally okay. Danielle was totally fine with it and totally great about it. You just have to, take that advice and be like, okay, what did I do differently? So for my case, it was like, think a little, like I first applied with the idea of having like a mental health AI app, which is super common nowadays. But I didn't think through like my competitors or like who is doing this, who is also doing this, like what makes you different. So if you're applying with an idea, make sure it's really thought through and it's specific and you found your niche, and you're showing how it can actually add value. And that takes time, which is totally okay. But ask for advice. Don't be complacent. Ask for what you need or want or need help with. But I think show your passion and show that you thought through this idea and how you're actually going to use the grant. Like, again, if you don't apply to it unless you need it. Like, I'm using it for like my hardware, my website, or something like that. But show that you actually need it, because they're not going to give you $1,000 just to blow on playing around with OpenAI's API or something. I don't know, but you get the idea. You have to show what you need it for. But those are the three things for sure.
That's great. That's great. Really, really great advice, I think, for the 15-17 grant, but also maybe like how to approach just like applying for non-dilutive and maybe dilutive funding in general. So I think that's really great. I'd love to hear maybe any. I mean, that was great advice. Like maybe you could also share some of your wisdom, just sort of in general, for people who maybe I know Julian was talking about mentors who are maybe just a couple steps ahead of you. For maybe people who are listening who are maybe a couple steps behind you, like what would you want to say to them?
Oh, so many things. It's a great question. I think what was important to me, yeah, just a couple of steps ago, was like breaking down self-limiting beliefs. I think like just understanding how much more capable you are than you actually think you are. And it's like, it's not like I slept one day and the next day I was like, oh, I can do anything in the world. Like it took a long time to break down those thoughts of like, I can't do this, or I'm not smart enough to do this. And I think that also comes with community and being surrounded by people who believe in you. If you're trying to find the people you're looking for, don't stop looking. Like there's so many people who are there, who are going to be there to support you. But you have to look for it. It is kind of hard, but it's going to happen. If you're looking for something you want to be, irrationally passionate about, or something you just want to pursue, explore your curiosity. Like Google things, watch videos, take notes on things that you find interesting. You never know what it might be. Like I never thought I'd be building AI plushies. Like who does that? Like I never thought I'd be doing this literally half a year ago or a year ago. So just follow what you think is interesting to you. In terms of, finding mentors who are going to be there to support you, make sure you're sending personalized like emails. Like that is like a big thing. I used to want to like automate it or be like sending like cold emails that were super generalized. But when you like look up to someone, like you have to show them that like you're almost like invested in them. It's like you're obviously developing like a relationship. It's a mentorship kind of thing. Like you have to show interest in how, and people are willing to help. You just have to show that, you're passionate and curious about things and you've done your research. And so that's the advice I'd give. But it's hard to do that. It takes time and it takes consistency. So don't give up on yourself. You are capable, and just shoot for the stars. Like what could go wrong?
That's great. That is super great. Thank you so much, Alex, for hopping on the podcast with us. I think this was a really awesome conversation. We're going to have all the links to where people can learn more about you, can learn more about what you're building. Maybe, who knows, maybe you'll get some pre-orders. That would be pretty cool. But regardless, thank you so much for joining us. We'll catch you later.
Yeah, this is great. And for those who are listening, if you want to learn more about Alex is working on, what other mergers are working on, you can definitely go to merge.club and check that out. We have a guide that covers lots of grants and lots of opportunities for non-dilutive funding. It's called the Merge Grant Guide. And if you go to merge.club, you can find that as well. It's a really valuable resource. I think, Ari, you were telling me earlier today that over the last couple of months, we've had people who've gotten over $100,000 worth of grants through the grant guide, which is just incredible to see. So hopefully folks will check that out and find some really valuable resources there as well, and maybe get some funding that they need to move their projects forward. Thanks for listening to another episode of the Merge Club podcast. We created this podcast so we could highlight the amazing community members in Merge. If you've received non-dilutive funding for your project, you can go to merge.club and join us. You can access tons of perks that will save you tons of money. You'll be able to connect with amazing people who have also received funding to work on their projects, and you can take your project to the next level. If you are looking for non-dilutive funding, just a little bit of money to be able to help you make progress on an ambitious idea, you should also go to our website. We have a guide. We give out grants. We refer you to grants. People who've used the guide, as I had mentioned, have already gotten hundreds of thousands of dollars in funding. We just want to make the place for microgrants online. And if that sounds good, you can check us out. If you enjoyed this podcast, you find it useful, we'd love for you to amplify it. Go and subscribe. Give us 5 stars on the podcast apps. We'd really appreciate it.